I'm with Jennifer Cole, who is a certified life coach with Dawning Hearts, and you work with partners of sex addicts. So I want to thank you for being here today to be part of the damage control video series that I'm doing for couples that are just being confronted with secret sexual behaviors. I really value your life experience and your experience working with partners, and I wanted to get your input on some of the issues that partners today are dealing with, and they're watching this right now, and they're looking for some answers, some hope, some guidance. So thanks so much for being here. So Jennifer, the first thing I was kind of wanted to get your input on is what we know as the 3 C's. And earlier in one of my other videos, I talk about one of the things that partners need to tell themselves are the 3 C's, that they did not cause this, they cannot control this, and they cannot cure this. And it's easy for me to say, hard to implement. What would your perspective or advice be to partners in walking out the 3 C's day by day?
That's a really good point, because I do hear women express themselves in different ways that would suggest that they think they can cure it, control it, and somehow they're at fault and they caused it. So I sometimes just will post in certain forums or come right out and say exactly that if the moment is right. Other times I have to break it down a little bit further. And so predominantly when they feel that they were the cause or they're taking too much responsibility for what's happened, I will take them back to and ask them if they know anything about their husband's or their significant other's sexual history and the acting out prior to them getting together.
Okay.
And I can't honestly even think of a case where he wasn't already doing some sort of secret sexual behavior prior to meeting her.
Right.
And that's really eye-opening sometimes, because they recognize that, oh, he was doing this long before he even met me.
Right.
So that's the part where I, talk about she didn't cause this at all.
Right.
And then the control and cure, I think, comes with time. It comes with boundaries. So I'll explore that. It comes with a lot of fear. Whenever I hear the word control or I see controlling type of behaviors, I reframe that for her and I call it safety seeking.
Okay.
And so we explore that, but it takes a bit of a different tone to it, if you will.
Okay.
So it also gives her language to speak to her husband and say, I'm not trying to control you. Please don't say that. You can choose to do whatever you want, but this is what I need to feel safe. So I definitely believe in the 3 C's, and just depending on the client situation at the moment, I'll decide from there how much I have to break it down.
I love it. That's great. One thing I often say is it would not have mattered who you married or who you dated. They would have done this. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
And the only difference I tell them is that, Susie Q over here, if she has little things, he would have adapted to those. Me being Jennifer, he would have adapted a different way with my personality, but it all would have come out pretty much the same way.
Right. The other thing I lead into from the 3 C's is the 2 B's. So the most common question I have from partners is, how do I know that he's going to change or he's going to recover? And I point out that recovery is a series of observable behaviors that they can see or not see. So believe behavior. What would be your take on believe behavior?
I say those exact same words
all
the time.
Right.
I almost should get a
Did you
tattoo.
steal my lines?
I don't know. I don't know.
You're stealing my material.
I think it's just that brilliant. But honestly, I feel like I should get a tattoo for it sometimes, because a lot of women, especially early in recovery or post D-Day, Discovery Day,
D-Day,
such as what we're talking about now, when they're sort of in that initial crisis phase, she doesn't know what to believe. Her whole world has been turned upside down often, because she will have potentially been blindsided or at least not recognized how bad it really was.
Right.
Sometimes until arrest has been made, or they're in financial ruin, or just something really comes out. And so from there, she's used to believing this wonderful man that she thought she had. And so it's a bit of a shift in her thinking to not necessarily take him at his word anymore. And if a woman values that, if that's a high value for her in her system and her belief system, then that's going to be challenging. But I do have to break it down for them and tell them things like, if you've asked him to read a book and he keeps saying, oh, I haven't got to it yet, but over here he's talking about how great he is in his recovery, I tell her to question that. Because if he's talking a good game, but not picking up that book and reading it, that's the behavior you want to see. The observable, measurable behavior. Is he going to meetings? Is he checking in with you on a
Exactly.
regular basis? Is he doing his own workbooks? Is he going to a therapist? Like all of that type of stuff. Has he changed just in his demeanor
Right.
with you, with the children?
Right.
Is he more reliable at work?
Right.
Things like that, that you can actually, if I were to spy on them, so to speak,
Right.
what would I be able to see? Not what she can feel, but what can I see? And so that's usually pretty eye-opening for them, and sometimes a little hard for them to get through because they so badly want to believe what he's saying.
Right. So Jen, when I meet couples, if I have a chance to see the two of them together in my practice, they're in a crisis, and a lot of times are questioning the relationship. And it may just be dating, or they may be heavily invested. They may have been married for a long time, have kids together, own a house together, investments, cars, all the whole 9 yards. And I say, look, you've just started, like you've just found out something's happened, and you're just starting this process. You just came into my office today. Give it 6 months. You know, you can get divorced anytime. So the rule of thumb is wait 6 months, and I say 6 months because it's a long enough time to believe behavior, but it's not a short enough time to be meaningless, because anyone can do anything for 30 days.
That's right.
Right? So what do you agree with the 6 month rule?
I do, and I often extend it even to 12 months.
Right.
Because a lot of times the guys are working a 12-step program, not always, but typically, if you do it robustly, it should take about a year to
Right.
complete those steps. And having said that, I work with partners and they go through 12 steps of their own as
Okay.
well. So when we try to tackle our own individual healing while we're working on the coupleship, that can be very revealing between those 6 and 12 months. But I absolutely agree, because so many times women are flooded with information, not just the information of him acting out, but now if they've shared with anybody they care about, or
Right.
it cares about them, all of a sudden they're getting told, leave the jerk. What are
Right.
you doing staying?
Yes. Friends and family members.
her value
they mean
system.
well, but they don't really understand.
Exactly,
The
and so
situation,
she's
yeah.
being flooded with judgment, if I can call it that.
Right. He'll never
She's-
change. They never change.
Pride sometimes.
Right,
Pride
right.
can get in our own way, where we're
Okay.
thinking, I would never have stayed with someone that did these types of things, but oh my gosh, now I'm actually thinking I might. It's a very confusing time. And so I always encourage people to just take a break. But there's certainly exceptions to that, wouldn't you say?
There are. Well, I mean, the exception I would bring up is if you're at risk of being hurt. If there's physical abuse, absolutely you need to get out. I think financial abuse is something I've heard you say, where maybe he's off spending all the money, or draining the bank accounts, or racking up the credit cards, and that's just putting her in a worse situation. So that would be the exceptions in my mind. Would you agree with that?
I would, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then even with the extent of the emotional and verbal abuse, in my experience, that was already present.
Right. It didn't just suddenly
It
start.
didn't just
right?
show up with the discovery of the sexual addiction or behaviors. So oftentimes she's had some sense of boundaries with that, or she's processed through that a little bit.
Right.
But boundary work can certainly help with that.
Right.
The other thing, if it's not quite as overt as what you've described, I also tell women, you can still go see a lawyer. It doesn't mean you're filing anything. You're just getting armed with information. Because some women feel like they need to take action. So when you and I suggest like the 6 to 12 month range, I do hear women sometimes go, because they feel like that's a lifetime from now. So I use two terms with them, or really just one. I talk about it just being a reassessment date. You don't have to make a decision.
Yeah, I've said that too.
6 months from now.
We're going to reassess the relationship in 6 months,
Exactly.
and then go from there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And use that information that you might get from a lawyer, just to know what your rights are, so that if and when the reassessment comes about and things haven't changed, you're kind of ready to take that next step, and you don't feel like you're starting all over again.
Right.
So I don't advocate for that. It's not like I'm trying to push her in that direction, but if it's something I pick up from her that she could really use in terms of just gaining some confidence, then absolutely knowledge is power. And she could figure out the status of her relationship from a legal perspective.
I like that. And you just made me think of something. Who do you talk to when you're the partner? So this surprised me when I first started working in this area, but a lot of them the partners are embarrassed And that didn't make sense to me at first. I thought, well, like, he's the one that's, slept with 100 women, or he's the one that's seen prostitutes. Why are you embarrassed? But, I hear all the time how it seems to either go, and I want you to speak to this, but it seems to either go to one or two extremes. It's like they want to blab to everybody, all his family, all her family. Let's put it on Facebook. Let's send people copies of the texts and all this sort of stuff, and just create so much more shame and chaos and hurt. And I speak to that in one of my earlier videos. Please don't do that. Okay. However, I understand that there's a great need to share with somebody. Like, my whole world's just been turned upside down, and I feel like I'm going to explode right now if I don't tell somebody. So who do you talk to? And also, so the other extreme, don't tell everybody, and at the same time, don't tell nobody. Is that good grammar?
Yeah, no,
don't
I know
tell
what you
anybody.
mean.
Don't
Yeah.
tell.
They
Don't
will
not
tell no
tell
one.
no one.
Yeah.
Okay, or however you want to say that.
No,
right?
it's perfect.
So what advice? So what I say is, find, all you need is one person. Okay, a good friend. If they're part of a faith community, maybe there's someone in the church or the synagogue that leads a group or is in a leadership position. You can go to them. Hopefully they understand this. I'm sorry to say that most of the time they won't.
I know.
Okay, but what do they do?
No, it's a really good start. And I say the same thing. Just start with somebody. And typically by the time a partner comes and finds me, I'm one of those people.
Right.
Thankfully,
Maybe you're the first one
I could
sometimes,
oftentimes be that person. So coaching, just as an aside for a moment, is mostly me trusting you are the expert of your own life. And I'm just here to help pull some of that out of you.
Right.
And I do that asking like empowering questions and things like that.
Okay.
Well, it's a little different in our niche. And a lot of times I am the first person that really would just sit and listen and can understand and empathize with what they're going through. So I
Right.
may sometimes let 1, 2, and 3 sessions go of just them sharing their story. And that typically wouldn't be coaching per se, other than I acknowledge and validate everything that they've gone through.
Right.
And they needed that outlet. And so what I say to them, if they want to start enlarging that circle, I tell them, people have to earn the right to hear your story. So contrary to the going and blabbing it to everybody, pause. And one of our coaching tools is called meta planning. And what that simply meta planning.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so
That's a
what
new
that
word.
so what that actually means is, okay, I'm about to make a decision here. I want to go tell everybody.
Right.
So it causes you to pause and picture that pebble with the ripple effect. So I'm about to tell everybody this stuff. Well, how does that affect say you first and foremost? Does that go with your value system or against it? Can you go to sleep at night knowing that you've done this? How does it affect your spouse? How does it affect your kids? How does it affect your job? Extended family? See what I mean? So I get her to just pause long enough and make good sound choices with each one of those ripples, so to
Right.
speak.
I like that. It kind of takes it out of the completely emotion-based decision and bringing a little bit of rationality to it.
And
right?
less impulsivity.
Right.
Right? So I understand these women are devastated and they're
yeah.
reacting. And
totally get it.
reactions are impulsive
Right.
most of the time,
Yeah.
right? So if we can help, if we can catch it in time, it's usually safer because as you alluded to, it creates more chaos. Often there's more judgment coming back on them because they
sure.
weren't really fussy with who they told.
Right.
But back to the point where women sometimes isolate. So I'm hoping that's where they could tap into a local group where
Okay.
things are supposed to stay anonymous, and I hope
Right.
it does.
Like S-Anon or
Yeah,
Pulsar.
anything like that, or even an online group. I run my groups online via telephone on purpose,
Oh,
even
okay.
with today's technology.
Okay.
I choose to do it over telephone, so if women don't even feel like they can face somebody, even on a
Right.
screen, they don't have to.
So you run a telephone
Support
that meets
groups.
every week? Mm-hmm. Okay,
So that's a
I'll
way.
get that. I want to get that information on the screen as well.
Okay.
And then are you taking new people now?
Always, I always have a
Okay.
waiting list for,
You
for
do?
new people.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So-
Good. That's awesome.
Yeah, but the other thing I want to speak to is that as you're creating this group of people that you trust to share your story, I call it our care team. So you're a part of that care team with your clinician background. Myself as a nurse has a small clinical background, plus as my life coaching skills. You have people of faith that you can bring in, a trusted friend.
Right.
So not any one person, despite how, we love what we do, is necessarily the end all be all.
Right.
You can build that care
I like
team
that
of
care
trusted
team.
people. So I think what I'm trying to say is somewhere in the middle is that happy medium
Right.
for success.
Right. Good. I like that. So Jen, doing a full disclosure is one of the hardest things. It's hard for both of them, really. I mean, I just see the guy sweating bullets and she's almost having a panic attack, but it's so important for the healing process. What would you say to partners that are about to go through or have just gone through a full disclosure, like just like a kaboom, the bomb's sort of gone off, and what could you speak to that?
Well, in short, basically, I tell them it's a fresh start because I trust the disclosure process, and I have a whole process that leads up to the disclosure day and a process for after. So it's not just a one moment in time.
Right.
And so with all of that preparation, I'm helping her build up to that. Likewise, during that time, she's working on her stuff.
Okay.
He's working on his.
Okay.
So that we create it as such a way that it's safe for both parties. It's informative.
Right.
And that's why I say it's a fresh start, because presumably they're not doing this if they're divorcing. That's usually one of my rules.
Okay.
I've made exceptions.
If they've decided to divorce, don't do a disclosure?
No, we might do an emergency disclosure,
Okay.
followed up by a polygraph in terms of are there legal things pending?
Okay.
Stuff that of real safety. Is there anything with child pornography? Stuff
Right.
like that she would probably have a right to know going forward as a co-parent.
Right.
But talking about just their relationship and things like that, I typically only do these with couples because she really thinks she wants to stay together.
Okay.
I mean, things can change, and I don't hold them to that.
Right. So, in the ideal world, you or I get to meet with them and go through the whole, process step by step. But the reality is that I would say probably more than half the time, by the time I see my clients, she's caught him yet again, and he's just kind of blurbed it all out. Like she's had the disclosure already. And, sometimes it is everything. He is telling everything. And they're just dumbfounded, shocked, traumatized. It just doesn't feel like a fresh start to them. I love that terminology, but when that happens in that moment, that feels more like the end of everything.
That's right.
So how do you step back from that?
Well, that's a great differentiation. So I was thinking more of the therapeutic healing disclosure part that we've worked on.
Yeah.
But you're right. Those dribble disclosures, because that's usually how they come out.
Or it's dribbled out over weeks or months,
yes,
right?
That's right. So she's just getting re-traumatized all over again.
Right.
And if he could just pause long enough that as much as I can put myself in his shoes and he thinks, okay, I want to share this and get it off my chest, he's also re-traumatizing her, and it's just going to take her that much longer to heal. Because she'll have to go through her own trauma work, and she'll have to break down, and trust is eroded yet again. And I hear from women all the time that it's actually the future dribble disclosures are worse than the initial.
Right.
Because she might just be starting to get her feet underneath her again, and then boom, the rug's pulled out again.
Right.
And it's harder and harder to get up.
Right.
After each one.
So I guess all she can do is hope that he is telling her everything, and then move on from there?
Well, I would like to say at that point, if that pain is as great as I can picture it, if she's not already, reach out and get help.
Right.
That's when she needs clinical or coaching type of help.
Professional help.
Sometimes support groups can help. There's lots of free things on Facebook, but we need more in depth. You need a place to kind of bounce this off of somebody that's either been there, done that, or has the professional background to help guide and start setting boundaries and saying, I don't need to hear this anymore. I don't want to hear it again until you've really sorted this out with your therapist, that sort of thing. So every case is slightly different. To this point, some women want to know every little detail, and some women really don't want to know anything at all.
Yeah, let's address that actually, because what I always encourage is the level of detail that is sufficient to describe the behavior, but not every gore detail. And because I tell partners, if you want to know the gore details. It's going to create an image in your mind. You're going to immediately picture that, and now you have to walk around the rest of your life with this picture of your partner doing whatever to whoever.
That's right.
So would you agree
Yeah,
with that?
I always
that
say you
advice?
can't unknow something,
Right.
or you can't unsee something
Right.
once you've got that picture in your brain. Now,
Right.
the opposite of that, though, what I hear from women is, oh, but my imagination is often worse.
No doubt.
Again,
Yes,
there's
I
a
hear
happy
that too.
medium,
Right.
right? So
Uh-huh.
I agree, and I try to dissuade them from the gory details
Mm-hmm.
while honoring their empowerment. I don't want to take that away from them,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where they need someone like me to help them get grounded,
Mm-hmm.
really think of the consequences of asking for this type of information,
Yeah.
and yet give her enough so that she can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I know how many prostitutes there were. I don't need to know every single location,
Right.
but I know there were 15 to 20 over this span of time, or something to that effect. And like, I think somewhere in the middle is sort of the healthy part where he can share this and feel like he's been honest with everything, and that she's got enough information to move forward.
Right. One of the things that I hear women very sincerely asking they're often genuinely perplexed about this, is why would my partner want to watch porn rather than have sex with me? And I'm willing and ready to be sexual, and I'm up in the bedroom waiting, and he's more interested in going down to the computer screen. So I know what my answer is to that from a an addiction point of view, a brain chemical point of view, but this is a lot of times women need an emotional answer to that, I guess. So what could you speak to that?
Yeah, well, very.
Because it feels like rejection and being
Yes.
unwanted, right?
Yes, I was going to say.
But
it's
is it
so
about them
personal.
not being wanted?
It's not at all.
Right.
And that's where.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's not
It's-
at all about
right.
that, but they feel that way. So their
Right.
perception is reality. And I
Right.
think that's what you're picking up on,
Yes.
right? So I will say to women, very kindly and sympathetically, of course, that it's not about you.
Right.
And I'll
And
say
you
it's
did
not
not cause
personal.
this, and
It's not personal.
right.
But when it comes to sexual intimacy,
It feels
you,
so personal.
You can't get any more
Of course
personal.
of course it's personal.
Right, so that's, what do you call that? Almost like an oxymoron, where it's like it's personal, but it's not.
Well, you're asking them to hold these two conflicting ideas in their head in the same time. And the fact
that's hard to do.
is they're both true at the same time.
Exactly, good point.
Right.
And so I try to explain that, and some women pick up on that right away. If they don't, I allow them to just explore those feelings of rejection,
Right.
and even sometimes abandonment. And then I will do a little bit of psychoeducation with them around sexual anorexia,
Right.
where he will start starving his wife of that sexual attention because it's quote unquote easier to get it from the screen.
Right.
And so, as in my experience, as men become more addicted to the screen or something else other than their wife, it's because they don't have to connect on emotional level. That's what's really hard for them.
Right.
And so it's easy, but they know their wife needs that emotional connection. Most
Right.
women do. I don't want to speak for everybody, but most women need the emotional side in order to engage sexually. And most of these guys have become so accustomed and tuned into, oh, well, I just turn the screen on and there you go.
Right.
Nothing. No
Right.
build up, no emotional, anything has to happen.
Yeah.
And so the other side of that too, if I can speak to this, is what I hear from some of these guys now in recovery. They'll say, well, I just got this distorted sense of thinking that all women were like those on the screen.
Right.
Ready for it anytime, will do just about anything. And when and if I approached my wife for those types of things, she would turn me down.
Right.
So there's rejection potentially happening both ways, but I would almost, if I can say it this way, his was an unhealthy expectation of his wife to engage in
Right.
those activities just because he's so accustomed to it on the screen.
Well, you know
So
what?
it goes back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? Let's expand that a bit, because I've had women, in tears, telling me, he wanted this sexually, he wanted that sexually, and I'm thinking, well, that's right from porn, anal sex and different things like that, and sometimes she goes along with it and then really is angry at herself for it, because against her better judgment, against her comfort zone, she agreed to these things, or sometimes she just straight out says no. But I really want women to know that you are not obligated to
Thank you.
fulfill your husband's porn fantasies, because in his mind, in his porn addicted brain, you're just being another sexual object in that moment. But I really want them to know that they don't need to betray themselves to feel like, and then the other thing that works his way in is, well, maybe if I do it, he won't watch porn, or he will be interested in sex with me. And I can't say clearly enough, this is about the neurochemical payoff and the psychological payoff that his brain gets that you cannot and will never be able to compete with. And you feel like you can't compete with it, and you're right, you can't, but you shouldn't have to compete with it, because this is the unprecedented situation that we live in. Any guy with the click of a mouse or a click on a smartphone can get a neurochemical payoff that far exceeds anything that's available in a real relationship.
That's right.
It's crazy.
That's right. Until they
And this is what
recondition
women are dealing
themselves,
with.
right?
Right, until they get clean and sober. I often put guys on a 30 or 60 day, no porn, no masturbation, no sex protocol, because they need to get their brains back down to just this sort of normal baseline.
That's right. I agree.
Right?
Oh, I agree with everything you said wholeheartedly.
Right.
And the way I phrase that to women who have come to me afterwards or have disclosed during some of their step work that they used to engage in some of these activities is I call that the emotional hangover. So now you're already not feeling connected to your husband, and you're in that kind of pain, and now
Right.
you've caused your own pain.
Right.
By engaging in things that go against your morals,
Right.
or just against your care and concern
comfort
for
zone
the
or
other
anything.
person.
Right.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point to make. And a lot of these women do feel like they're competing. That said, I've known women who have said, I've been available to my husband and given it to him 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And he still goes off and
Yeah,
does
I've
things.
talked to guys that told me they have sex with their wife and then they go right downstairs and watch porn. Literally, right,
like
a
2
minute
seconds
after.
later.
Yeah.
I know. Likewise, we've all heard stories like of celebrities that have been in similar situations, and we've got like the Christy Brinkley's of the world who are model material. I mean, she is a supermodel and had this happen to her. So it doesn't
Right.
matter how gorgeous you are, your body size, how willing you are, any of those things as a partner, you really just can't compete. And if you're
Right.
being asked to, either subconsciously or overtly being asked to basically engage in these things, you have the right to say no.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. If you look at all the celebrity, sex addicts, I don't need to name them, but if you look at their wives, they're all married or were married to gorgeous women. So it really doesn't matter what you look like, does it?
Nope, not
Because
one
you
bit.
did not cause
That's
this.
right.
Yes.
And then the control thing, it doesn't matter how often you have sex, it's not going to change if that's how his brain is now wired.
Well, you know what? It even goes beyond that. Like I've talked to women, dye my hair blonde. Let's get breast implants.
Yes.
Let's start working out, 5 days a week because I'm going to lose that weight. Like it really gets to the core of their identity, the point that they start like changing who they are because of his compulsion.
That's
it's
right.
crazy.
It is crazy.
It's not about you, women. Please hear me. It's not, never was and never will be about you. It's about him. It's about his brain. Right?
And you know what? That said, a lot of women, just even from the time that they were young girls, there's some self-esteem issues already brewing.
It gets complex, right?
But this just sort of makes that explode
Right.
even more. And
Yeah.
they really start questioning themselves. So a
Yeah.
lot of the work I'll do with women, I try to separate out. I know it's based on his acting out, or at least it seems like it starts there. But we tease that out by doing a lot of worthiness work together and trying to just keep
I
the
like it.
focus on her.
Right.
And how it is that she can see herself in a different and loving way. So turn that compassion that she might have towards him onto herself. And so
Right.
anyway, we won't get into that right now,
But
but
that's
there's
good.
a
I
lot
like
of
that.
good coaching work available as it is through therapy for them to really work on their self-esteem and self-worth,
I love it.
which will help them feel more confident to say no
Absolutely.
if and when they don't want to.
Right.
So it's brilliant.
So Jen, I notice with clients, there seems to be this demarcation of around 30 years old where 30 and under, many more women actually watch porn. It's normal. They've grown up with, all the guys are much more open about it. They'll like show each other things on their phone. And then sort of 30 and up, it's kind of more like closer to our generation of it's more of a secret thing. You don't really talk about it. But I've run into clients where they come in, he watches porn, but then she's like, yeah, well, I watch porn too, or I've watched porn with him, or sometimes even on my own I watch porn, and then he kind of likes to sort of bring that up, and you watch porn too, So how do you address that?
Well, I help them first and foremost if I'm hearing sort of a sense of guilt or self-judgment there. We'll break that down a little bit, and I'll ask her more about when she did those things in the past.
Right.
Did it cause her pain? And with the example you gave, probably in those moments it didn't. She thought she was engaging in something with him, participating as a couple with this type of activity, even on her own. She would probably have very good reasons. So assuming in that time she wasn't experiencing any pain, no problem. This is where I like to take the labels off of whether it's sex addiction, porn addiction, anything like that. Because then if they're now sitting in your office, there's pain.
There's pain.
Something's happened.
Yeah,
So-
something's changed,
Yeah.
right?
So all of a sudden, what she may have been okay with, so to speak, 3 months ago, 3 years ago, suddenly is causing her distress and maybe even him as well. And so that's where I like to strip everything of the labels and let's just talk about the pain. If it didn't cause you pain before, that's fine, but it is now. Let's go.
And I also find that most partners don't initially at the beginning of the relationship understand the addictive nature of pornography, and because it's an addiction, or it can be, it escalates. So there's a difference between 5 or 10 years ago and he watches porn once a month, and maybe he really did watch porn once a month, or they only watched it together. And now fast forward and it's like 2-3 times a day, and this is the big thing, it's a secret, and he's lied to her.
That's right.
Right.
All of those things. Or sometimes we hear, it was okay with her until now he suddenly loses his job.
Right.
Because he's watching it on work time or work
Right.
computers or, things like that, where it becomes so much more devastating on so many levels that she never would have thought of, even if she knew about some of these activities going into the relationship.
Right.
Because I do hear from a lot of women that say, well, you know what? And she takes this on, kind of back to the cause, cure, control thing. She'll take it on and take over responsibility a little bit, going, I knew he watched it before we got married.
Right.
I knew it.
It's
And
almost
she's
like
almost like kicking
blames herself, right.
Yeah, and it's like, no, but you never knew what this was going to turn into. You had no concept of the addiction side of things. None of us could possibly have known. And I guess you can compare it, and I hear this analogy all the time. It's like those that become alcoholics.
I was just thinking of that, yeah.
And there's those that can have 1 or 2 drinks
Yeah.
and have a perfectly healthy, functional life.
And when you met them, they may have controlled alcohol. There may not have been any crazy behavior. And so you just thought, okay, you drank along with them. And now 10 years later, here they are, blacking out and out of control and all the rest of it. So sometimes
driving
it's just
convictions,
life.
like everything.
Right.
Yeah.
But life happens sometimes, right? Give me some emotional insight into the difference emotionally between your boyfriend or husband who's watched porn and your boyfriend or husband who's acted out with another person. And I want to divide that into 2 things. One is actual communication online, like webcamming or chatting, and the other would be direct contact. So how does that feel different to them? Because in my mind, there's a part of me that says, I guess I hear so many different stories of things. It's just all of it compulsive sexual behavior is all compulsive sexual behavior, and it can all be treated the same way. But I appreciate as well, of course, that for the person on the other side, there is a distinct emotional difference between your partner that watches porn and has actually talked to people. So could you just speak to that?
Well, really, it comes down to there is no emotional difference. Sometimes women will initially present and think, I'm confused. It's just porn. I'm sure he hasn't slept with anybody else, but why am I so upset? She can't put the words to it. Okay. And then we will work with that, or she might be in one of my larger support groups and other women will chime in and help her see that, does it feel like cheating to you? Like, does it feel that way? And she'll say yes.
Most do, yeah.
So whether it was you're cheating with a screen or you're cheating with a real person, the other person involved, the partner, feels betrayed.
But is it
has
not
that sense of
worse?
pain.
Is it not worse if they sleep with someone?
Some women just say it is, some women don't.
Really?
Yeah. And
Okay, that surprises me.
Then
it's really no different to some women. There's no difference.
No, well, and then here's the other dynamic. So you get these women into either small functional like coaching groups or even some of these larger forums, say on Facebook or those types of places. And now all of a sudden, these poor women coming in whose husbands only looked at porn versus others that have acted out with prostitutes and affairs and things like that. Now they take on guilt because they played in their head like, oh, my situation isn't as bad as hers. Maybe I shouldn't even be here. I mean,
Right.
it gets messy.
Right.
But what I always say to these women, and whenever I see those threads of comments happening, I'll chime in and say, everyone just give me your top 3 feeling words about what this does to you, how you
Right.
feel about it. And it's always, I'm traumatized, I'm betrayed, I'm hurt, this is excruciating pain, I can't trust him, all of those
Yeah.
types of words, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're all the same.
Yeah.
Whether he acted out physically with another person or just with the pornography, they all say the same emotional impact words.
Right. So Jennifer, another thing that comes up a lot is this is from partners, I should have seen the signs. This is all, of course, in hindsight, everything's perfectly clear, right?
Of course.
You know, why the coming home late, the secretiveness with the phone, shutting the computer down when I walk in the room, right? So I should have noticed the signs, or I should have done something to prevent this. Can you please speak to those 2 things? Because I just find that sucks them down so fast into this, pit of just feeling, I guess that taking on that responsibility and that self-blame again. Yeah.
Well, firstly, I'd always acknowledge and sympathize and empathize with that experience that they're having, right? Where they, part of it is it's reflection, and it can be really healthy. And this is how I try to frame it for them. If they really feel the need to kind of go back with that hindsight and see things, let's use that to our advantage going forward. So instead of
You encourage the hindsight?
I can, if they're in the right place, we can reframe it. So instead
Okay.
of looking at it as the should have, could have, would have,
Right.
and I always say, don't shit all over yourself. That's what I
Don't
tell my
don't
women.
shit all
Don't
over
shit
yourself?
all over yourself.
All right, okay.
Because that's self-judgment. When I hear that word, she's judging,
Yes.
right? What she did something wrong or bad or whatever. So if they really feel the need to do that, I say, okay, fine. But let's reframe it. So now we use that to validate her intuition.
Okay.
And we use that going forward. We use it as a tool, not a weapon,
Right.
but as a tool, self-care tool going forward. So you may not have recognized the signs all at once, but now that we've done this reflection, now you know what to look for. Not that she's like, waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time, but it's creating that awareness that she really, really needs. That's one of the biggest things that I see when women go there. And I think the other point really is around like when they start to dissect like that. I always give the example, if you can track with me for a moment, if you picture, because we live in Canada where the leaves change color and fall off the
Right,
trees.
right.
Okay? And I know I have a beautiful tree in my backyard, and, it seems to me like I can notice them changing color, but it might only be a couple of days later. I don't even know. And all of a sudden I'll look outside and go, pretty much all the leaves are gone.
Right.
How did that happen?
That big wind came up and...
Who knows?
Right.
I didn't watch every single leaf fall off that tree. I couldn't possibly have seen every single leaf fall off that tree. And so I've allowed myself to kind of let that go. The same thing is she could not have possibly have seen and put together the idea that, well, he was late 3 weeks ago and tonight he's secretive with his phone and 2 years from now he gets a strange text that I don't understand.
Right.
Sometimes it's just too much good stuff happens in between to really tally up all the bad.
Right.
So I just give that visualization of the leaves
That's
falling
good. I
off
like
the
that.
tree, and you don't blame yourself for not seeing every leaf fall off the tree,
Right.
right? I know it's
I like
not
that.
quite the same consequence or significance, but it's something relatable.
Well, and don't get mad at yourself because you didn't see every leaf fall off the tree.
Exactly.
Right. That's not your job.
Yeah.
To count the leaves falling, just like it's not your job to ever to have to be a babysitter to your partner.
And that's it. That's the other
Right.
thing, is that really the job, the onus was on him
Right.
to have not done those things in the first place.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
go into, when we all sign on, let's say,
Yeah.
these are married couples. I mean, there's a contract there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
When you stand up in church or in front of the justice of the peace or whoever, you've made a contract. And so unless something is spoken otherwise, you're assuming
Yeah.
that that's carrying forward. So that's
sure.
another reason I give her to not really go into that self-blame, because she was making the safe and healthy assumption
Right.
that he was upholding
Right.
their vows and that
Well,
commitment.
And I tell partners that, I say, you're probably basically a decent, trustworthy person, and assumed that your husband was also a decent, trustworthy person, right? If you didn't, you wouldn't have married them to begin with.
Exactly.
So don't fault yourself, for not catching it. You know, no woman just wakes up and says, "I wonder if my husband's a sex addict." You
Yeah.
know,
It's
like
hard,
it's just not. It's not in their. It's not in your frame of thought,
No.
of concept, right?
No, like,
So
I mean,
why would it be,
if
right?
they're a hard worker, for example, typically, and they stay at work late a few nights, your first instinct is, oh, he must be having an affair. No, it's
No.
probably he's working hard for our family and had to stay
Right.
late to catch up on something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, your first assumption isn't to the worst.
Right.
It's often towards the best because you love
Right.
that person.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I know. Good
Yeah.
point though. Because women often do that, and it's heartbreaking to see, and I help them through it. But we quickly try to reframe that as
Yes.
much as we can.
No, I like that. That's good reframe. So Jennifer, when I first start working with couples, I think you said a phrase earlier, safety seeking, establishing the betrayed partner's greatest emotional need or greatest need is to establish emotional safety. The addict's greatest need, I mean, there could be several, but one of them is, give me something clear to do now that's different, and that is a step in the right direction. So I start with setting bottom lines. So as a person in recovery myself, my bottom lines are no pornography, no masturbation, no inappropriate contact with other women, no lies or secrets. And that often covers like 80% of the people.
Sure it does.
Throw in a few other behaviors, maybe, you know, no massage parlors, no escorts, no webcamming or whatever. So this is written down on paper, and I also establish boundaries around every bottom line. So for example, with pornography, there needs to be boundaries around access. It's very simple. If you eliminate or reduce your ability to access pornography, it will be much harder to watch it, right? And so a filter might be one. I don't go online if my wife's not in the room. I turn it off at 10 o'clock, things like that. So I want to get your feedback on how important that is for the partner, and also discuss the issue of slips. So when I'm talking with clients, I differentiate between a slip and a relapse. So a relapse means you break a bottom line. So let's say you go online, you watch porn, you webcam, and then you don't tell anybody. You don't tell your partner, you don't tell me, you don't go to your 12-step group, you skip therapy, and you start lying. Like, basically you're just going back to living the compulsive behaviors, living like an addict. So I say, in an ideal world, you'll walk out of my office today and he'll never engage in any of these behaviors again. Wouldn't that be great? And sometimes that happens. But in 83% of the cases, there'll be 1 to 3 slips. And a slip is like this. I watch porn. I check in with my partner within 24 hours. I keep my therapy appointment. I am open and honest with my therapist. I go to my group and I tell them, and I learn something from the experience. So what I implement with them is what I call the check-in, and I want you to also talk about how that can work both ways. But what's the feedback? Because you're the one that talks to partners every day, more than I do even. And how does that help them know? And do a lot of their spouses even have bottom lines? So I guess it's kind of like 2 questions. When their spouses have bottom lines, how does that help them? And when they don't have clear, specific written bottom lines, what's that like?
Yeah, well, that's a good place to start, because I love that. I can't stress enough that with the trauma that she's probably going through in that moment with discovery or confession or whatever's happened, she probably just needs to focus on herself to just breathe.
Right.
So the more he can do and take responsibility for, the way better this is going to
Way
go.
better, right.
So what I mean by that is, if he can truly set his own bottom lines, communicate those appropriately with his wife to say, this is what I'm promising myself never to do again because of the man I want to be in recovery. Does that help you feel safe? I can pretty much guarantee she's going to go yes, yes, and yes. There might be 1 or 2 things she might mention. But for the most part, if he can take responsibility for that, we're golden.
Right.
That's going to be amazing. But the other part of that, where you suggested, if he doesn't really have clear bottom lines, or there's still a little bit of the gaming it going on,
Right.
you know, like I might look at, you know, a swimsuit catalog, but I'm not going to go look at porn anymore, like stuff like that, then that's where I work with my partners who are picking up on this, either overtly or just in their gut, that something's not right. That's where I talk to them about writing down a whole list of rights. And sometimes that feels a little uncomfortable. Rights. Their own. I have a right
Like
to.
personal
Yep.
rights?
I have a whole list of rights. I have a right to this, and this in my relationship.
Wow.
Some of
Boundaries, basically.
It
setting
is,
boundaries.
but that's the first start, because if I start talking boundaries right away, sometimes that gets a little messy for people.
Okay.
So I start with the rights, and they're very personal.
Like, I have the right to be not lied to. I have the right to be respected. I have the right
For
to
fidelity,
be faithful.
all of those types of
Okay.
things. And
So,
some of
so
them are
really just basic stuff, right?
pretty much basic. And then I say, if you need to expand on that, I need the right to, I don't know, privacy on my own computer while I'm talking to my new support group. Like, whatever she needs
Right.
helps her establish like a foundation. And from there, she can communicate to him and say, you know what, I'm still not picking up on, that you're totally sober in this area. And these are my rights. And from now on, if I have a sense that this is happening, or I catch you doing whatever, then this is what's going to happen.
Okay.
And that helps, again, women feel like they're not trying to control. Because the other thing with an addict who's not fully embraced recovery yet, it'll often get thrown back in her face, oh, you're just trying to control me. And I give women the language to speak back to that. And it's like, no, this is a powerful request. I'm not controlling you. You can choose whether to abide by this or not.
Right.
This is what I need.
Right.
And then he kind of backs down because, and then I kind of joke with women and say, we're not that powerful, and remind them of that, because
Right.
if we could make them do something, we would have made them not do this in the first place.
Right.
So I think that's important to just sort of differentiate. It's much better if he can set his own boundaries and lovingly communicate them with her and have a dialogue. And if that's not quite where things are in the relationship at that moment, then she has the right to speak into it and follow through with what she needs to do.
Okay, and then with handling slips, what I tell the partner is, look, you have 24. If you slip up, you have 24 hours. And my mantra is, your wife does not need a perfect guy. She needs an honest guy. And so your job in 24 hours. So I'd say 24 because if maybe they're at work or they're away or whatever. So you want to give a little bit of leeway. But you have to go to her and tell her what happened, where you were, what you were thinking, what you were doing, what red flags you ignored, what you learned, and what you'll do different. And I have a whole script, laid out for them. It's just to make it a no-brainer. Follow the script. It's right there. But you have to check in with her. However, there has to be consequences. So I've had some fun with this, I have to admit, okay? And I kind of get guys to set their consequences. But I tell them, like, you've lived in this alternate universe where you get to do what you want, when you want, answer to nobody, and get away with it. And that's not how the real world works. In the real world, for every action, there's a reaction. So if you slip, you're going to have a consequence. So it could be anything from, running 5K, have a cold shower, eat a raw onion. I have one client lately who's given a lot of money to the political party that he despises. Yes. And let me tell you, it hurts. Like, he's going, oh, when I'm running the credit card through, right? Like,
wait until they get the mailers that keep coming afterwards. It's a good reminder.
Yeah. Well, I actually took a picture of the thank you screen and when he gave the donation, and I sent it to him, and I said, here's just a little reminder for you, right? But the partner doesn't need a perfect guy, but she needs an honest guy. But how do you handle, from your end of it, how do you handle the slip-ups? Because they happen. And of course, consequences can be different for every bottom line, right? Like, if he masturbates, usually that doesn't mean a divorce.
Right.
If he sleeps with an escort, that usually means a divorce. So that's all laid out ahead of time. But how do they talk to you when you're, doing a session with them and they say, well, he looked at porn or he masturbated, but he came and told me? Like, does that give them hope that he came and told them, or are they just still mad that he's not completely stopped right from day one?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, but you're right. And when you said they want an honest guy, the biggest pain point I hear out of all of our conversation today are the lies.
Right.
The lies.
And every woman I've asked, what's worse, the lies or the behavior?
It's the lies.
It's the lies.
Always.
It's always the lies.
Always.
Yeah.
So in that case, I often hear, probably, let's just say 90% of the time, women will say, I'm hurt that this happened and it's kind of freaking me out a bit, but I'm glad he told me. That's usually the
Right.
end. Like, I'm so glad he
I'm
told
glad
me.
he told me. Okay.
So there's usually that. So there's a lot more, I think, forgiveness, or if that's the right word, or just a little more contemplation about what to do when he's been honest with her. But like you said, usually if I'm working with someone, we will have a slip and relapse mitigation strategy. So not a prevention plan, because we can't prevent if he's going to slip or relapse. But we can certainly plan ahead of time. I call it the emergency plan.
But what does that sound like?
Well, that's where I take the time when they're in a relatively good place, because we can't do this in crisis. Okay, so if I can use that analogy, I used to be an emergency planner.
Okay.
So if you waited until the train derailed, spilling chemicals everywhere, to suddenly think this through and evacuate
It's too
half a
late.
city,
It's too late,
everyone's in chaos. You haven't practiced it. It's going to be messy and probably catastrophic. So likewise, we've learned through history to create an emergency plan. So you tabletop it, you think it through, what's the worst that can happen, who's going to be responsible for what, that kind of thing. And I do something similar with my clients. So not that we want to live in fear, so I'll do a whole bunch of fears work with them so we can sort of eliminate some of that stuff. And the true risks that remain, we will work through and create an emergency plan. And when she does that and she really walks through it and writes down, you know what? It gives her a little bit more confidence. And what she does, it gives her freedom. Because now she doesn't have to live in fear every day of, what if today's the day I find out he slips? What she does is basically, in theory, puts that emergency plan up on the shelf and forgets about it.
Right.
Now she has the liberty of and freedom of going, you know what? I hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, I know where I'm going to go to. But between now and then, I don't have to think about it.
Okay.
I can live my life. I can love him. We can be happy together, or whatever it is that she wants to focus on.
Right.
But that's the part that I love. And to me, slips, given that he's told her right away, but relapses are just as hurtful.
Right.
And she can use the same plan for both.
Okay.
She really, really can. Can I just speak to the 24 tell rule?
Sure.
Okay, because I do that too.
Okay.
If he hasn't come up with that idea, or they haven't worked with someone like you that suggests that, then I'll suggest it to her as well.
Okay.
And similar to yours, but what I add in, part of the reason for that 24-hour span is because some of these guys are so guilt-ridden and want to share. They puke to their wives what happened. That's re-traumatizing.
Okay.
That can be worse for her.
Okay.
Okay. So, yes, she wants to know, but what I encourage him to do through her is to take it to your sponsor or your therapist first.
Okay.
Or read a textbook if you can't get a hold of them or something.
Okay.
Process it first. And then go and talk to your wife using all the criteria that you mentioned.
Right, okay.
Because a lot of times these guys have just panicked.
Right.
Because they really are truly trying to change.
Right.
But in their panic and they're spewing out of this information, they haven't stopped to think about who's receiving it.
Right.
And I've had women go full on back into their PTSD.
Right.
Because
okay.
of it. So, and it didn't have to be like
So
that.
it would probably be useful if they actually had a worksheet, maybe, like a slip up relapse worksheet where they kind of take time, fill in the blanks, think it through, give it a few hours, and then go and almost just kind of read it to her kind of thing.
It could
or
be, if
something
that's
like
what they
that,
agree
right?
to.
Yeah.
We can't speak for every couple, and
No.
some women are going to be different. But I'm strictly talking from like a textbook trauma model
Right.
perspective. It's all going to be painful information,
Yeah.
but we can take away some of that sting by communicating it with love, empathy, gentleness.
And what I'm trying to convey to partners with the whole, 1 to 3 slips in the first year, and I say, look, this isn't a license to go and screw up for 3. You don't get
Right.
like 3 free passes. But what I'm trying to convey to partners is, you don't need to go full blown into, oh my God, this isn't going to work. This is, here we go. He's never going to. You don't need to go right back to he'll never change.
Yeah.
This is a part of the change. This is part of the change process, right? For anyone out there who's tried to lose weight, you don't just start your diet Monday and then drop a pound a week for 20 weeks. Like you drop a few, you even out, you plateau, you put 1 on, you drop 3, you drop 5, you put a couple on, right? That's just part of the process, right?
I agree.
Here and there, you eat a donut, right? So, because you had a donut last month once, does that mean you're not committed to losing weight? No, it just means you slipped and had a donut and learned that, you know what, I don't really want that anymore.
It wasn't worth it.
It wasn't worth
that
it.
kind of thing.
I don't want to be the guy that eats donuts. They don't do anything for me. It doesn't taste as good as it used to. It's not rewarding anymore. Okay, because from the guy in recovery, I find slips are often some of the most valuable learning experiences that they go through. So again, we're back to this holding space for these conflicting, her need absolutely is 100% adherence to recovery, but at the same time, for most men, having a couple of slips is very, very informative to them and valuable actually in the process. So I'm hoping that they can both kind of just hold that space for each other. And of course, when I say that, he's still doing all the other behaviors.
That's right.
Right?
It's in context.
That's why it's not a relapse, right? That's why I differentiate. He slipped. He told me, he told you, he told his group, he's still going to therapy, he's doing his reading, okay? It's all part of the process.
Well, it's being
no
transparent.
Need to panic. No
it's
need
being
to panic.
transparent
Right.
is what it comes down to,
Right.
which is the opposite of keeping secrets,
Exactly.
which got them into trouble in the first place.
Exactly.
So it does show that desire to help. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The one thing I want to just suggest to the addicts, though, is that when these things do happen and she does feel like she's back at square one, even if we try to tell her not to, there is definitely that sense of doom and gloom because she's reliving that pain all over
For
again.
sure, right.
What these guys need to realize is that he needs now to work 10 times harder.
Right.
And the next time he screws up, you're going to have to work 30, 50 times harder because
Right.
what you did before to help her doesn't fly anymore because look what happened. You were doing all these great things. That's how her mind works.
Yeah.
And some of these guys, I see it, they get a little frustrated and a little bit resentful because they're like, oh, now she wants flowers every day. And it's like, you screwed up and now you have to double down.
Yeah.
That's just the way it works. And it's not that I even suggest that. It's just been my experience with so many women that anecdotally, that's what they say almost every single time.
Yes.
And it's not that she's trying to crack the whip or do anything. It's just what he did before no longer will suffice because of the slip, because of the relapse. The other thing I mentioned to women too, you mentioned, sometimes the boundaries are relative, right? So if it's a slip with masturbation, you're not going to run out and file for divorce. But I do talk to women about those repeat offenders, and I say, 1, 2, 3 strikes.
Right.
So it could be first time you masturbate, you're sleeping in a different room for 3 nights. 3 months later, you masturbate again, then it's going to end up like you have to go stay in a hotel for 3 nights.
Yeah. Escalating.
And so that way she
consequences.
doesn't feel like I want women to know that boundaries are to be firm and flexible
Right.
at the same time.
Right.
Firm in the sense that you're going to follow through and you have the confidence to do so, but flexible for when the situation presents itself or as time goes on and you don't need to be rigid.
Gotcha.
With that anymore. So it's a whole lot of ebb and flow with these things.
Yeah.
Open communication with each other
Yeah.
is the most ideal with all the boundaries.
Hey, Darren.
Hey, sorry. Is your dad around?
No.
I'll try to call him later. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Like on the blooper reel.
Yeah. I should have.
Come on in. What are your thoughts on this? Like,
Hey, you watch porn? We need
yeah.
you.
right? What's your
Can
take
I
on
give me your
it?
phone? Can I see your history?
Yeah.
Oh,
Can you imagine?
does your girlfriend know about this? Oh, let me text her.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine if we went on to like the streets of New York City and just randomly said, "Let me see your phone."
I know, right? Oh, okay. Oh, I got to stretch to go to the washroom. This stop.
Okay, so what were you